Further analysis on our top story, the nullification of the Kenyan election. We're very pleased to be joined in studio by Mr. Peter Fabricius, a consultant with the Institute for Security Studies. Mr. Fabricius, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you.
What's your take on this historic ruling? I mean, a lot of people all over the continent are saying this must have, really created a lot of headway for future elections that are disputed.
Yeah, it's a massive decision
Yeah.
and a huge precedent. Raila Odinga, you heard there, was saying that he doesn't know of he's sure that there hasn't been a precedent in Africa. And as far as I can tell, and the experts I've been speaking to can also tell, this is the first time that a court has overruled an election decision in Africa. So it's a massive precedent.
What's the lesson to be learned here, Peter?
Well, the lesson to be learned is to follow the proper prescripts of the Constitution and the electoral law in the first place if you wish to avoid embarrassment, as there has been massive embarrassment. Now, I think for the Electoral Commission in Kenya more than anyone else. And obviously the major lesson is that the courts prevail. You know, the ultimate law is determined by the courts, and the courts must prevail.
Now, Peter, the court ruling has triggered massive celebrations in different parts of Kenya, but will this be a short-lived celebration, considering the fact that, of course, the court has ruled that the elections be held within the next 60 days? And can't this also lead to violence to the supporters of Kenyatta?
You know, in the short term, I think not, because Kenyatta, to his credit, they very grudgingly accepted the results, and he called on his supporters to accept them and to react peacefully and to shake hands with your neighbor, etc. So that's a very good thing. Now, of course, if the elections are held again in 60 days, as we expect, although there's some questions about that too, and the result is the same, then who knows what the outcome would be. Because what's not absolutely clear from this result is exactly what was wrong. To some degree, what the court didn't elaborate very much on its judgment.
Yes,
the Constitution wasn't followed,
and
that the electoral laws weren't followed. Now, there are all kinds of allegations that were made about obviously tampering with voting forms and tallying forms and so on. But they didn't pronounce on that. And to some degree, what they were really saying is you haven't followed the procedure, you haven't given us enough time really to do a thorough analysis of these results, so they must be rerun. So we don't know what the implications are for another election in 60 days' time. It could go the same way, it could go the other way. And the other problem is, as you heard Raila Odinga saying too, is that they completely reject now the credibility of the Electoral Commission in conducting this new election. So if a new election commission has to be appointed in the meantime, that could push the date back beyond 60 days, I would think.
But Peter, don't you think Kenya maybe should have postponed the elections, considering, some of the developments that were happening leading up to the elections? And we also saw a top official, electoral official, being killed, and his death is still a mystery till this day.
Yeah, it is. That is a good question. I mean, look, apart from that, and no one quite knows, I mean, if you speak to people on the government side, they will say it had nothing to do with the elections. Of course, if you speak to Raila Odinga, he will say it had everything to do with the elections, because somebody tortured this guy and extracted the passwords for the electoral system, digital system. So I don't know if a postponement would have helped. I mean, there were questions raised about the appointment of the head of the commission and so on, but those were political questions rather than procedural questions, you know.
All right, now let's talk about NASA calling for the prosecution of the IEBC, effectively, of course, disbanding the entire body. Who's going to conduct the next elections within 60 days, Peter?
Well, that is the issue. And I mean, I'm afraid that if they don't do something about the Electoral Commission, I mean, whether they fire them all or prosecute them is another question, then again, you're going to have the same kind of doubts and the same possible negative, reaction to the results. So that is a serious question that has to be addressed. I don't know about prosecution, but it certainly seems like the Electoral Commission needs to be reappointed.
All right, let's talk about Kenyatta, of course, saying that he's calling for peace and for people to shun tribalism. Is he playing a tribal card now, Peter, at this stage?
You know, it's very interesting that he would admit that so openly, because, I mean, it's not cool.
What do elections have to do with tribalism?
Yeah, they're not supposed to, but as everyone knows, I'm afraid, in Kenya they have a whole lot to do with it, Both the two main coalitions were essentially drawn up on tribal lines, with Kikuyu and Kalenjin mainly in Kenyatta's camp, in Odinga's camp, we had Luo, Luea, and Kamba. So, you know, for a president to come out and state that, I don't think he is being tribal on that point. I think that is a genuine call for reconciliation before the next poll, you know.
All right, and Peter, before I let you go, let's talk about the process that is now to follow leading up to the next elections in 60 days. What happens to the current cabinet? Are they null and void? Do they not have any executive powers? Who's ruling Kenya?
Well, I don't know the precise detail of the constitution, but I would imagine, as in most cases, that, you know, you have like a caretaker government. The incumbent government runs the country till the results are out and a new government is formed. Or, you know,
so Kenyatta is still president.
Kenyatta will remain president. I guess his cabinet will remain as long as he wants them. So he's still the boss. You know.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us and giving us that sound analysis. Mr. Peter Fabricius, who's a consultant with the Institute for Security Studies, talking to us about some of the developments, of course, following the Supreme Court's ruling in the Kenyan elections.